All right, guys, so we're back here with Paul under house arrest, and we're reading through Philippians and learning a little bit about how Paul handled being under house arrest because we kind of feel like that's where we're at right now. So, yesterday, Paul starts off Philippians in chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, with a prayer. And he prays for his partners, and I prayed for you guys, and I really hope that you're praying for me as well as we continue to read and have to deal with times that are kind of uncertain. Today we're going to read verses 12 through the beginning of verse 18. There's a period right in the middle of verse 18, so we're going to stop at the period. So let's go ahead and read that.
I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of rivalry, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only then, in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice.
In the Old Testament, there's a story about Joseph, and a lot of us know this story, the coat of many colors, and he gets beat up and actually sold into slavery by his brothers. And it's a very evil thing that his brothers do here. He ends up going to Egypt, and there he rises up in the ranks until he's falsely accused of something, and he gets thrown into prison. And then he makes his way back out of there by interpreting dreams through the power of God. And he does so well with this that he works his way right back up the ranks all the way to second in command in the most powerful country in the world. He's second only to Pharaoh, and he actually ends up helping out his brothers that come back. They don't realize it's him, and they come to him asking for food because of this famine. And in a weird turn of events, Joseph forgives them. And at the end of that story, their father passes away. He dies, and they come back, and they're afraid now Joseph's going to take it out on us. And they say something to that effect to him, and they're trying to make things right. And what Joseph says is a really cool thing. He says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." I think the story's got to be in Paul's mind as he's reading this, that God took Joseph's story when something bad that was happening, and he turned it to good. He took something evil and he made it good. And Paul is writing about how he's in prison, and actually it's turned out to be a good thing. The whole imperial guard and people are hearing about Christ because he's in prison. And he's talking about how it's actually a good thing. What if us being under house arrest actually turned into something that pushed the gospel forward? What if our being stuck at home can advance the gospel? How could that happen? Well, I think honestly it can happen, and I think if you let God work through us, it kind of already is happening. You have churches all across the nation who are putting more material online, more stuff about God. There are people who are showing people that they care because of Christ and helping people out. And you can do this too. We can do this. And so I want to challenge you today for today's little session. How are you going to advance the gospel of Christ while we're stuck here at home? What are you going to do to push the gospel forward while you're stuck at home, not going to school? It can be with your own family, in your community, online, however you want to do it. But we've got to do something to be pushing the gospel forward, and maybe God can use us to bring good out of this bad situation. And then, but the second half of what Paul has to say, we got to be careful. He says that some people are doing this out of fear and rivalry. And so some people are doing this because they're jealous of Paul, or some people are actually proclaiming Christ out of rivalry or out of fear. They're out for themselves. They're actually pushing themselves more than they're pushing Christ. And we've got to be careful that we're not that kind of person. But at the same time, we've got to have this attitude that Paul has at the end where he says in verse 18, "What then, as long as Christ is being proclaimed?" And so I want you to remember today that, number one, God uses bad situations to bring about good. He has a tendency to do this throughout the Bible. You have Joseph bringing about good for God's people. You have Paul being imprisoned and bringing about good for God's people. And then you have probably the biggest and most important example of the Son of God being beaten, being tortured by evil people for the good of you and me and of everybody. So let's turn around today. Let's take a bad situation and proclaim Christ to the world.